The night might be tender, but there will be nothing tender about the kick to the emotional balls that this book is bound to deliver. Hi everyone, here's the bonus once again. Today I'm reviewing Tender is the Night by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I spoke recently in another video on Fitzgerald on his short stories together with the short stories of J.D. Salinger about the fact that he is one of those authors where people tend to know universally, all readers tend to know The Great Gatsby, but the rest of his oeuvre, I don't think that it is so widely read nowadays, at least here in Europe. It might be different in the US, let me know if it is. Which is a pity for several reasons. I don't despise The Great Gatsby, it's not necessarily among my favorite books. I do believe that lots of people, especially young people, tend to read it wrong, if you get my meaning. They usually tend to read it as a love story, a story of star-crossed lovers, whereas it's supposed to be a complication of that. But again, by now it's kind of a truism. It's almost boring to discuss these things. Let's not do that. I do believe that some of Fitzgerald's short stories qualify as his best fiction, his best writing. With all that, I haven't read all he's written, I haven't read The Beautiful and the Damned yet. What I can tell you after reading Tender is the Night is that his oeuvre, his bibliography, is much more varied than I expected. Tender is the Night is by far the most difficult piece of writing by Fitzgerald I have read so far. It's not a very enjoyable book, if I have to be honest. Part of it has to do with certain unpleasantness when it comes to its topic, and with the fact that, especially if you read the book from a contemporary perspective, you can immerse yourself in the time as much as you want. Most of these characters are bound to look like total assholes. They are rich people in the 1920s acting like obnoxious rich people, having a ball at the expenses of French and Italian locals and Swiss locals too. Yeah, they are all of them terrible, awful human beings. But also it's largely to do with the language, with the way it's written. This feels very much like modernism to me, at least low modernism, and I believe I have no critical claim. I have never studied this side of Fitzgerald's fiction. I do believe, though, that you can feel the influence of his old friend Hemingway in here. Definitely this feels so much different from the luxurious, rich prose of Fitzgerald's early short stories. Now, as someone who first got into fiction written in English through H.P. Lovecraft, I am all for overwritten Baroque writing. Personally, if a sentence doesn't contain at least a couple of adverbs, I generally don't consider it worth pronouncing, and I have to admit that modernism in general is probably the one literary current or movement or era that I find most difficult to relate to and to really appreciate. For whatever reason, I find the seriousness of its writing, its linguistic games, its bare-bone descriptions, especially when it comes to scenes and action, the way it portrays a character's psychology through either stream of consciousness or some other variation on it. I find those things very hard to relate to, so much more than the supposed heartless irony of postmodernism, and so much more than the sentimentalism of 19th century realism, be it the genuine sort you find in, I don't know, George Eliot, or the kind that stems from random poor people having terrible shit happen to them in naturalism, in people like Thomas Hardy. But Tender is the Night is far from a heartless book, is far from a linguistic game, and lots of terrible shit does happen to people in here, rich people admittedly, but still, what this book is to me is an exploration of sadness, and more specifically of the peculiar misery of love fading, whether it's young love that was accompanied by great expectations that never turn into real happiness, or a love that was supposed to be eternal but instead at one point simply dies. And this book doesn't have, to be honest, the most astonishing, unforgettable plot. Even though there is a pretty shocking plot twist that comes rather early into the narrative. What I mean is that it mostly revolves around the shenanigans of rich people acting terribly, once more, with other human beings. But you don't find any shocking moment, any shocking plot twist. Definitely Great Gatsby has a more thrilling, more unforgettable plot, but at the same time, this kind of narrative structure, this deteriorating narrative structure is what I want to say. The way the book shows the life of these characters, how their supposedly perfect life very slowly falls apart. It might not make for great thrills, but it mirrors that feeling of love fading very well. The book starts with the main character, Dick Diver, who is an upstanding guy. He has flaws for sure, but he is alright, and very slowly you witness his complete collapse. And that is represented rather masterfully in the book. I have to give it to Fitzgerald. The other great thing, the other great trick, and very difficult trick that Tender is the Night pulls off, is that it switches perspectives and points of view in a way that is masterful in terms of narratology, in terms of how you shift from a book with a certain protagonist to a different protagonist, and you go back in time in a flashback, and then you go back to the present of the book without ever losing your engagement with the plot, and with the story, with the narrative of it all, without any perceivable break in the way these different sections are written, but still with each section characterized by a difference in the way the events are related, to mirror how different characters look at these same events, at this same rich life, made of, again, parties and trips, and finding things to do with your time when you just have too much money on your hands, how all these different characters look at it differently. That's very difficult to pull off, again, when books attempt that, when they attempt this major kind of shift in point of view. What usually happens, what happens a lot of times with me, is that since I started reading the novel and I got attached to the story of one character, when I move to another character's perspective, I kind of lose my interest, or at the very least I wish that the book would just go back to the one I knew before and focus again on that protagonist I had learned to love. Instead, that doesn't really happen at all in the book, and you do get a resolution for all of the stories of these different characters, as much resolution as, again, you can get in a book which doesn't really feature explosions or dragons or that kind of thrilling escalating plot. But you're not going to read Tender is the Night for any of those reasons. You should read the book if you are interested in an evisceration of the whole idea of misery, in a dissertation on how the life of very happy people can completely fall apart without any major tragedy befalling them, without any catastrophe happening to them, just because that's the way life is. Sometimes it breaks down and it falls apart. I'm not going to say that you'll have great fun with Tender is the Night. If you're interested in those ideas, you can have great sadness with the book, but that's fine too. There's nothing wrong with misery. Also, if you're interested in understanding the full scope of Fitzgerald's gifts as a writer, you have to read Tender is the Night. I have to admit, I think this is going to be the kind of book I remember more because of its themes and its vibe than because of its characters or its structure or its language or the combination of all these things, you know, because of it being a novel. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It happens sometimes, and I don't want to give the impression I didn't like Tender is the Night, because I did. I'm very happy I read it, and I'm very curious to hear what the Fitzgerald fanboys out there and fangirls think about the book. Do you think it's among his best? Don't you? What's your favorite Fitzgerald novel? I think I'll be reading The Beautiful and the Damned sometime in the near future, because now I'm very curious. And let me know what you think about Tender is the Night in the comments below. And thank you as always for watching. Bye guys.